So we're breaking down. I don't know in what order we're going to do it. I might even leave this for you guys to give your opinion on. So, sexuality is different from gender, another member reasoned, while one said, it's just putting all the weirdos together. Yes, obviously, sexuality, who you are physically attracted to, is different from some kind of social construct about expression and social roles. I'm ashamed to admit that I agreed with all of this at the time. As a group, we and you notice like ashamed. Apparently, these are the people who are in charge of Pride now. People who think that you should be ashamed. As a group, we were debating whether or not to include transgender people along with our university lesbian, gay, and bisexual group. Well, this is crazy though, isn't it? Because like, didn't they? How can you even have a lesbian, gay, and bisexual group? I thought that trans people had been there since the beginning. I thought it was just trans people before anything else. I thought the trans people started all the lesbian, gay, and bisexual groups. That's what we're told. I'm so lucky I had time and space to learn, to change my mind. I like this idea it's like time and space to learn, when of course what it actually is trans identified people are some of the most kind of abusive people out there online. So it's not like there are people like, oh, we'll give you time, space to think things through. No, that's not how they act at all. Too many LGBTQ plus people are raised to hate ourselves before we know ourselves, particularly in conservative homes. Certainly, there are lots of gay or same sex attracted males raised in conservative homes who seem to end up becoming trans identified, almost as if they've been subconsciously told, or told on some level, that it's better to be a straight woman than a gay man. But of course, that wouldn't be an example of people in conservative homes being taught to hate ourselves. I recall watching some kind of daytime chat show where gay relationships were being furiously debated. A man stood up and bellowed, now this guy is an alpha. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Oh no. The crowd cheered. Oh no, this person, bless them, they live in like an awkward conservative copy pasta. Maybe there was a time in British society when standing up and bellowing, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, would get an uproarious applause from the crowd. But obviously, considering the current culture of things, it's kind of ridiculous to imagine that happening. He said that one of the reasons why trans members weren't coming was because of the barrier just LGB created. It's being assumed that they should want trans identified people to be part of this organization when they're not lesbians, gays, or bisexuals. As it's presented here, the debate isn't even over whether trans people should be joining the LGB group. My dad's repeated demands that I be a real man echoed in my head. It made me think about how difficult being a young trans person must have been. Okay, let's think about this for a second again. The idea of being a real man being defined by your actions and your expression is much closer to trans identity than it is to the gender critical, biological, or sex affirming approach. A gender critical person would never talk about being a real man as if being a real man involves anything other than being biologically male. Years later, I went back to visit my university's LGBTQ plus society. It was thriving. It has a diverse range of people of all genders and sexualities. It was a supportive, welcoming place. This can only be a good thing. I kind of like that because it's just like really hard not to read that as it has loads of straight people now. Like, this is good. Progress. Worse, we have a conservative government that is deliberately fighting cultural wars over the rights of trans people to distract from Partygate and to distract from the cost of living crisis. This was clearly shown at PMQs this month. Rather than answering a question about windfall tax, Boris Johnson would rather talk about the definition of woman. Here's the thing about this, Ken. Conservatives are happy that they are currently in a situation where they can be right about something even when they're screwing a lot of stuff up. You're saying like, oh, they're using a culture war issue. But it's like there are lots of women who actually do care about this, and lots of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals who do care about this, and therefore, why wouldn't the conservatives talk about it? Like, that's kind of the thing. I don't really understand this logic of it being in some way intrinsically illegitimate for the conservatives to talk about this. And if they're going to focus on an area where they think they're in the right, well, then the left either have to confidently, and when I say left, I mean kind of the establishment political left, have to either confidently and assertively show that their position is right, which I don't think they'll be able to do on trans identity. Of course, the other thing they could do, therefore, is just abandon the issue and therefore make it so the government can't talk about it. The conservatives can't talk about it. There has to be an opportunity to draw away from the misinformation and hostility in our online spaces. I will say, here's the thing. When you're talking to somebody in person, niceness takes more of a priority, or like not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings. But you have to recognize that while not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings is a good thing, truth is also a good thing. And I think sometimes being able to say just out into the ether what you believe without having to worry about the idea that your beliefs are directly confronting another person is actually quite a good thing. Like, you don't want to become so detached from the reality that you're talking about other people that you start being really mean, but at the same time, you don't want to be so conscious of the fact you're talking about people that you start trying to sound nice, and compromising truth. I slowly discovered I was living in a world where some people viewed their body as the problem instead of society. I felt deeply uncomfortable with the left championing this. So this seems to be like actually, expressing gender critical feminism accurately. Maybe this person, so far this person seems to be authentically gender critical. My suspicion, based on how this person seems to understand gender critical ideas, is that this person's probably going to end it by saying like, hey, you know, I have some criticisms of the gender critical movement. It'll be interesting to see to what extent I agree with those criticisms. I can see now that hormones and surgery can improve trans people's lives in a way that nothing else can. I am skeptical of that, but I could go one way or the other. I don't think we can know right now what is the best strategy for dealing with gender dysphoria, because I think it's something which is inevitably going to be a complicated issue that's kind of solved kind of through a generational acquisition of more knowledge. Being in a shelter is not subject to normal social rules. Survivors are usually in a heightened place of fear and trauma. I believe the majority of trans women have sympathy to this fear and would not want to be the person who made another survivor feel deeply uncomfortable. Here's the other thing which this person hasn't mentioned. Trans identified people should be able to fight for their own spaces. Women set up these spaces. Why should biological males be allowed, frankly, to come in and just be like, no, there are spaces now? I thought that all of these were going to be people who were not gender critical in the first place, presenting themselves as if they were like people who would change their mind. Instead, it was somebody who actually did seem to be authentically gender critical, basically not really rejecting the core gender critical points of view, just saying, in terms of like practicality, in terms of like what we actually need to do in terms of society functioning, maybe we need to make a few accommodations for trans identity, which like I wouldn't call that ex gender critical personally. Gender critical community, i.e., those who believe that sex and gender are distinct, that there are only two sexes, and that the rights of women must always stem from sex, not gender. Okay, you know what? That is a fair representation of the gender critical beliefs to some extent. It recognizes, for example, the recognition that sex and gender are distinct. It's interesting that so many TRAs I get comment on my video saying, you don't understand the difference between sex and gender, but here, clearly there is a recognition of that difference, and that the rights of women must always stem from sex, not gender. Now, this I would kind of disagree with. The question is, what does stem mean, right? Really, I think the word that's missing here is referent. Like, that's a word I use a lot, and I think it's a very useful word. Gender is one of the things that relates to women's loss of rights. It just doesn't determine who's a woman. I also wasn't truly fine with having new members join who vehemently disagreed with me on most beliefs. If this is like our kind of first step towards being gender critical, this just speaks to this person's divisiveness and egotism, that they're like, well, I just couldn't stand the idea of ever entertaining the idea that, I might have something kind of interesting to learn from speaking with people who, might disagree with me on other issues. Intelligent, caring people who I loved and respected were never willing to take arms with me. I feel like this might be trying to imply, like, hey, look, all of these intelligent people were disagreeing, as if, like, oh, that means, that should be a warning sign, the fact intelligent people were disagreeing. But that's, of course, really meaningless, because intelligent people can agree with a lot of nonsense. And so I turned away from them for confirmation and towards Cause Bar. Look, don't turn to anyone. I don't understand that mentality. It's very unhealthy. So here you get this idea of like, well, being on the wrong side of history. And this is something which I do think is genuinely kind of an interesting point. Like usually you might say, well, doesn't it seem like most of the good ideas have broad support? But the answer is historically no. Like if most of the ideas had broad support historically, then we wouldn't be in this horrible world we're living in right now. And it's interesting, again, it kind of shows different attitudes, because, of course, what Graham Linehan's pointed out, and I would tend to agree with this, is that actually with the kind of trans identity thing, we have a wonderful opportunity to actually see what kind of people we are. So my attitude when I see people who don't care about this is to think, well, I mean, I guess in the past there have been moments where lots of people have believed the wrong thing, and there have been just a few people standing up for what's right. And here I have an opportunity to be one of those people who's standing up for what's right. So yeah, this idea of being like, well, everyone disagrees with me, so I must be wrong, is of course the attitude that, like, that's the attitude of nobody who's ever going to change history in a positive way, or really impact society in a positive way, frankly. I voted Biden, I posted. The responses were swift. Thanks for helping to drag our sex-based rights and protections over the cliff with your eyes wide open, woke, handmaiden, and best of all, lefty. The thing here is, like, this person got a negative response from posting in a thread that was explicitly anti-Biden. Like, this exact same thing would happen, literally, if it was any other group of people who didn't like Biden, if it was kind of people who really cared about student loan forgiveness, if it was people who really cared about environmentalism and didn't think Biden had done enough for that. If they were saying, oh, Biden's awful, he's the worst thing ever, he's part of the problem because he hasn't done enough to, he's still taking money from fossil fuel companies probably and all that kind of stuff. And then you come in like, well, I voted Biden. They're going to say, well, basically all the same responses. Although lefty is quite funny, of course, because Biden is not left wing. So whoever called somebody left wing for voting Biden needs to have their head checked. The reason I voted for Biden, Clinton, and Obama is because I hate the Middle East and want it to get nuked. That's not what it says. For quite a while, Cause Bar was what I lived and breathed, what I spoke endlessly about with my spouse, parents, closest friends, and children, including my then 9-year-old child. By the way, very strange. Like, strange to get this obsessed with something so quickly. While I was far from ready to question the veracity of my beliefs, this is an interesting one, because this is literally having been said after this person already must have presumably previously thought trans identity was good, not had any of these problems. So this person saying, oh, I wasn't ready to question the veracity of my beliefs, but this person already presumably had questioned the veracity of their beliefs in order to even change their mind. Acting as if gender-critical people just haven't thought through their beliefs is almost kind of a necessary contradiction, because the vast majority of gender-critical people only believe what they believe now because they have thought through their beliefs. The idea, like, it's always funny to me when people say, hey, have you ever considered maybe the idea that you're wrong? And it's like, well, yes, obviously. When I was first exposed to trans identity, I accepted it uncritically. It was only in becoming gender critical that I did question my beliefs and think about whether or not I'm wrong. So clearly I've questioned and thought about my beliefs before. That's why I'm gender critical. So what did me now avoiding gender critical activism actually mean? Could it be that I didn't really want it? That I didn't really believe the views I'd been spouting? Well, that would be interesting, because it would, totally mean that you weren't meaningfully gender critical. Could the reason I left also be because I'd begun to shift back towards my original beliefs regarding trans rights and gender, beliefs that were more congruent to how I think of and perceive the world? And then there's my eldest kid, once a sensitive, compassionate, and intelligent child who's now a sensitive, compassionate, intelligent man. When I was first pontificating about my gender critical ideals a few years ago, I assumed he'd be on side. I love that this is about to culminate with this person being like, well, if my little 9-year-old kid doesn't agree with me. Mum, he said, oh my god, okay, so like, I know that, like, kids say things to their parents, but it's really hard for me to read any, like, dialogue being attributed to a real-world child as not being made up by the parents. But let's see. Mum, he said, I'll always love you, but I'm really upset about this. Your views are hurtful. I never thought I'd say this to you, but I'm really disappointed. My kid is disappointed in me? What? What if during the last few years, when family and friends had listened indulgently to me, left the room in anger, or avoided conversations, it had been me who possibly had been missing the point? Well, yeah, that's a possibility. What if science never catching up was okay because human experience isn't solely tethered to absolute material reality? Yeah, that's fine, but that's not a basis to just, like, throw science out the window. Like, the problem is with all this, like, what if, and then some kind of nebulous idea, that's not a basis for believing anything. Like, you have to say, based on the fact that science has limitations, therefore we can't use material reality as our reference for whether somebody's a man or woman, which I don't think you can argue. So overall, I mean, it was a bit of a bumpy ride, I suppose. It was kind of like going back and forth between I used to be gender critical and then I was never gender critical. I had, I believe that biology was what makes somebody a woman, and then saying that belief never truly fit. Yeah, not really a great basis for claiming to have meaningfully been gender critical and meaningfully rejected gender critical ideas. A space where transphobia is a taboo subject is a space that exists to justify and perpetuate transphobia. The fact this person is even using the word transphobia makes me wonder whether or not they were sincerely gender critical. Because at this point, like, I mean, I don't know any gender critical person who engages with the word, with like the concept of transphobia as if it means something. I began to follow the gender debate in the wake of the J.K. Rowling incident in 2020. I would also specify that I had OCD and was already barely in control of it due to stress from the pandemic. So what happened next was something of a perfect storm. So both of the kind of ex-gender critical testimonies we've seen have people basically admitting to being totally obsessed with this issue when they first got into it. At this point I walked away, or at least I tried to. Then I stumbled, though I try to hide it, it's clear. My world crumbles when you are not near. What is going on here is genuinely an anti-trans radicalization chamber. The gender critical position, when at its most radical, is at its best. Yeah, this is a good story, I think, so actually I will repeat it for funsies. This person, Anastasia, shows up and is like, well, I'm ex-gender critical, and, gender critical people are awful, or whatever, was roughly the thing. So that was kind of my motivation to go onto the profile and see this article posted. What was interesting is after that, there was a really dumb discussion. I was like, oh, you're ex-gender critical. Just out of interest, have you seen any of my content on YouTube? Because I was trying to gauge, is this somebody who would agree with me? Is this somebody who formally would have agreed with me? And what they instead did is they replied to me and they were like, this really weird kind of antagonistic comment. And then I kind of just said, well, I didn't really know who you were. That's why I was kind of wondering whether or not you knew who I was so I could get some sense of what your beliefs were. And then Katie Montgomery showed up and was like, I'm surprised you haven't heard of her. She's a really big deal, or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to know about everyone. And then Katie Montgomery was basically like, I was mocking you because you thought she would have heard of you. And it's like, I didn't think she would have heard of me. I just wanted to know if she had. Living as a woman entails sharing women's political interests, and I conceptualize womanhood as a political category. Honestly, I just think that's kind of a weird thing to say. Like, I feel like that's kind of misunderstanding the reality that politics relates to almost every aspect of the human experience. Like, I guess by that logic, you'd also say that, I don't know, like, being depressed is a political category because, of course, mental health is a huge aspect of politics that matters. Transition is a material reality. The surgery is a material reality. Like, no one's denying that. Obviously, that doesn't mean it's the same thing as biological sex. I don't think anyone is denying that males and females can have shared interests. And obviously, if there is a male cross-dresser, they might have some of the same political interests as females. If there are biological males who are viewing femininity in a negative way, then that is likely to affect negatively both women who are perceived as feminine, but also, of course, men who maybe are perceived as feminine. But it quickly blossoms into a full-blown commitment to denying any similarities between cis women and trans women. That is nonsense. Look, let me stress. If anybody is denying any similarities between cis women and trans women, they're obviously talking bollocks. Like, here's the thing. Saying I live as a woman, as in the way that I live is equivalent to how the average woman would live because I am perceived to be a woman, is one thing. Saying I am a woman because I live as a woman is saying that the definition of what it means to be a woman should come from society's sexist ideas about womanhood. And that's, of course, what a lot of women are going to object to. They recognize that a significant change has taken place, but at the same time, they refuse to acknowledge that it has any effect on the person's social experience. Again, if somebody is saying this has no effect, I genuinely do think that they are dumb. Even regardless of like how similar you think it makes somebody to a biological female, I don't think you can deny that it makes somebody dramatically different from a regular masculine presenting dude. We are supposed to care trans women are using the women's bathrooms. They're in the next stall with the door shut, and we're supposed to feel threatened. I don't care. By now, I aggressively don't care. Catherine McKinnon. There are some women who would be terrified of that reality, knowing there is a biological male next to them in the women's bathroom. So it just comes across kind of, I don't know, selfish and dismissive. Hello, doggy. Ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff, ruff. In the words of Catherine McKinnon, male dominant society has defined woman as a discrete biological group forever. If that was going to produce liberation, we'd be free. Catherine McKinnon seems to be ignoring the fact that male dominant society has also defined women as a non-biological group, because, of course, male dominant society has given us the idea of real women and real men, which doesn't make any sense if it's just a biological category. Male-dominated society has given us man up, or you're not behaving womanly, and things like that. So male-dominant society, yes, has given us the biological definition, but it's also given us the kind of definition beyond biology. The way that gender-critical feminism will achieve liberation is by entirely eradicating the definition of woman as relating to anything other than biological reality. This sort of tendency reveals that the gender-critical claim that sex is immutable is often meant not just descriptively, but also prescriptively. My belief is I would say that my claim that you can't change sex is 100% descriptive, not prescriptive. I don't have a problem. Like I've literally said in videos before that I don't have a problem with the idea morally of somebody changing sex. My objection to it is that I don't think it makes sense. If there is somebody who is actually like genuinely averse on a base level to gender nonconformity, then that is simply them going against gender critical principles and basically being a hypocrite and inconsistent. Gender critical identity politics are much more intense than I believe most GCs realize. Remaining in these spaces despite abandoning the ideology has left me feeling like I'm always one infraction from being kicked out of the category of womanhood myself. I don't get the impression that any gender critical person is on the verge of declaring that people who disagree with them aren't women. I don't think there's anything conditional about the gender critical conception of womanhood. At least I hope there isn't, because that wouldn't make sense. Like, if anybody's ever said you're not a woman because you are, trans affirming, that's nonsense. So many current GCs are former TRAs. I haven't known too many people the other way around. But I would definitely be classified as a former TRA. But certainly, even if you're not going to say TRA, well, I would definitely was somebody who affirmed trans identity and thought the trans identity made sense. Although I think deep down I did know it didn't. But I just thought, well, even though I don't, even though it makes no sense, I've still got to keep saying that it's correct. Do you ever wonder at what point I'm going to start playing the Harry Potter games, Like, I mean, because if anyone will remember, I said it before, it was like pretty much the first thing I said when I mentioned streaming, because of obviously J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, all of that. Oh, did anyone see Ash Sakar's hot take on Salman Rushdie being stabbed? Yeah, okay, I want to read it because it's funny. The stabbing of Salman Rushdie, although it has decades-old origins, alongside the campaign of threats and intimidation against drag queens in the US, makes it feel like a very grim, dangerous time for artistic expressions. I mean, it's kind of funny because, of course, there's no mention of things like Dave Chappelle being punched. Yeah, there's no mention of the fact that the left, in many instances, want to censor people. Instead, it's like, well, they want to censor drag queens, which is a weird comment. People aren't rejecting necessarily the drag queeniness itself, but like the actual content of what the drag queens are doing, and that in relation to children. Like somebody posted a video of a drag queen straight up exposing his willy to kids at like a concert or something. So it's like such a radically different thing. I mean, I've never read the book The Satanic Verses, but obviously the story it's about is a story of Muhammad got a revelation, allegedly, that it was okay to worship pagan gods and goddesses. And then later on, he took that revelation back and said that actually that revelation came from Satan, not God, which just creates a whole load of theological issues for Muslims, because it's like, okay, so you're now having it on the record that your prophet can be deceived by revelations from Satan, Is that really where you're going? But yeah, religion is complicated. I think, is that, I hate to throw out such a hot take, but I think religion is complicated for the main reason being that I suspect, like, the average person just isn't going to engage fully with the theology of their religion. And as such, you kind of have a situation where all religions are very different from each other. But in practice, because most people don't actually engage with that theology, I would say usually the way religion is expressed in practice is basically just an expression of human nature itself. Oh, what I was going to say about the person who said, "Do I mind conservatives enjoying my content?" No, but you know who I won't tolerate enjoying my content? Libertarians, the worst. It's just the ideology for lazy people. They're always like, I know what the solution to this problem is. Nothing. Okay, nice one, you losers. When I'm bored, I draw imaginary house floor plans. Does anyone want to see my mansion in Sims? There's the toilet, scented candles in case you do a big stinky poo poo, a kind of podcast recording studio. This is the waiting room for my office. So this is my office. So this is the secondary hall. Now this is my poker room. This is kind of just the arts and crafts room. Now this is my home cinema system. Obviously, I'm a big fan of high ceilings, so here we have some nice high ceilings. So here you've got the kind of main bougie sitting area. Then there's the dining room. Now this is the brown sitting area. It's mostly where you sit so you can complain about the fact that it's not dinner yet. The kitchen, then this is your two fridges, because I actually think, unironically, I genuinely think that it's worth having more than one fridge. So there we go. And it's in a perfectly white room because I think there's something very pure about the experience of watching Daddy's Home 2 as a family. This is the baby room. So I should explain, this is kind of like the guest suite, Romeo and Juliet bathroom, which connects to the main area where the parents will stay. So then this is the TV room. Like, basically, it's like a breakfast room. This is the billiards room. Now, this is the the fountain room, and it also connects to the sauna. And then, if you notice, it goes down to the downstairs. So you can go from the pool, you can go up and you can get into the sauna. Brilliant, great. This is like the kind of fanball bathroom, hamster cage, a dog bed or cat bed. The kids kind of share a book space area. A book space area? That was a stupid thing to say. Now, these are the bedrooms of the kids. And obviously, you have to have 3 kids to offset all the people having no kids. Because, you've got to keep it at replacement levels. Otherwise, there might not be anyone left to die in the climate catastrophe. So, blue room for the boy. Because blue is the boy color. Now, obviously, you might say, well, the blue room's obviously for the boy and the red room's obviously for the girl. Or the murderer in The Shining. The green room is, of course, for the mutated alien boy. So this is where everything becomes Chinese. This is like the kind of place where you have the little kind of sitting area of the Chinese wishing well, obviously. This is the meditating, sitting around, smoking a hookah, and occasionally playing chess room while you listen to the sound of the water feature. A very important room. And then this is the massage room. This is my kind of chapel area. This is going to be a spare bedroom. So I can tell you, you notice this when it gets a bit barren, but I can tell you what each room has the purpose of being. So this is spare room number 2, spare room number 3. So this room is the train room. So yeah, and then this is like kind of just the hanging out area, I don't know why the bed's there, which is the master bedroom. And yeah, I haven't done it yet. And then this is the master bathroom. This is the kind of study. This is like my little study connected. So, when I wake up in the morning with a head like what you done, I can just go into here and just start boning up. Just like so much boning. There'll be so much boning going on in this room. This room, not this room, will be the room where the boning happens. Just boning up all day. Where I'm really going to want to do my boning is... I've been holding this on the side. You may have noticed there's an entire part of the house you haven't seen yet, and that is the library. These are even more books. The library gets really, look at that. There's library. Okay, boom, boom. And then down here, more books. Oh, and then finally we get to the bottom floor of the library, which has some books. But you know what else it has? A book. It's a secret doorway. Look, it's a secret doorway. And then, in here, we have the Dracula room. Like, this would be like the Al Capone's vault of my house. Basically, there is this room, which is basically kind of like a cozy room. Like, my logic with this, I want it to be like a snug. Anyway, so this is basically just like the club with the bar, just for dancing, for chilling, for having fun. And then you have this, the bowling alley. And then here is the one thing that every place should have, a gender-neutral bathroom. Now, let's all agree that it is in no way extravagant. I love the moon so much. The moon is one of my biggest passions in life. Like, I just can't handle how excited it makes me.